RPGs, role-playing games. There are so many of them out there in the world of gaming that vary in so many aspects that it's hard to keep them all under one term. The Witcher 3, Final Fantasy, Elden Ring, Disco Elysium, Deus Ex, Fire Emblem, Mass Effect, and more are some of the best games and series in the RPG genre. If you've played any of them, you know that these games don't play similar to one another at all, but there are some overarching aspects that link them together, like deep customization options, dialogue choices that matter, worlds that react to the choices that you make, and well-written characters that revolve around the player. There's so many tropes that these games have that have evolved since the first RPG releases, spearheaded by some of the biggest devs behind RPGs. Studios like Bethesda, Square Enix, and BioWare are some of the biggest developers behind the biggest RPGs of all time, with a strong repertoire to back it up. But since the 90s, there's been a studio that has been building up their portfolio of RPGs with a very distinct style compared to the other RPGs mentioned. The geniuses behind the Shin Megami Tensei series and its spin-off series called Persona, with a brand new game coming out next week, Metaphor, Refantazio, it's Atlus. Ever since I got introduced to Persona 5, Atlus's biggest success to date, I've tried to take a deeper dive into their games. Not the games that they publish like Unicorn Overlord or 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, but their own developed games. I've watched hours of video essays, accumulated at least 300 hours of content from their games, which are still rookie numbers when discussing Atlus's games, and I can confidently say that in the RPG space of gaming, there is no studio that makes games like Atlus. So to start, when thinking about Atlus's games, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Games set in Japan, high school settings, or even just having a normal high school student gaining some crazy superpower that puts them up against the destroyer of the entire universe? If you know, you know, but for me, it's something a lot simpler. Its looks. From booting up Persona 5 for the very first time to Shin Megami Tensei 3's opening, Atluses have a very distinct and incredible way of presenting the visuals of their games. The easiest point of reference is to just look at the Persona titles because they take some real creative liberties with their art direction that relates to the core mechanic in each game. From twisted darkness and greens of Persona 3's Dark Hour, to the cloudy fog that covers an almost evil color of desire in the TV worlds of Persona 4, to the abstract and unknown ways the palaces and mementos look like in Persona 5. Each main combat area, if we can call it that, in the modern Persona games represents the main themes in each of these games and adds further depth to the atmosphere they're going for, which is usually in stark contrast to the real world vibes, even if there are some parallels that are drawn between the two. This world is so bleak and unsettling, and then oh my goodness, look at this tree. This sunlight, this people, this classroom, this beach. On a surface level, these games just look so bright and cheerful because that's just how day-to-day life looks like. But then, every so often, the Persona art team brings that horror from their dark worlds, the mangled corpse on the utility pole, or the people falling to apathy syndrome. Atlus manages to illustrate their core concepts and keeps them relevant throughout, which is also thanks to their pacing. But if there's one game that I think really highlights how talented the Atlus team is in their world design, it has to be Shin Megami Tensei 3 from 2003. This game is just a wonder to take in. I'm still playing through it, and it's the only true SMT game that I've played, but man, are the visuals so striking. That cinematic when the world crumbles in upon itself, warping itself into a sphere, is stunning. Like, yeah, this cinematic has aged a bit considering it's from the PS2, but man, does it really set the mood for what's to come. Visual eye candy. And as I continue my journey in the now deformed version of Tokyo, there have been other moments at the start of the journey that have caught my attention. The melancholic and grim school, to the ever-changing and minimalist looks of the Amala network. Man, that network actually stuck a lot with me. I don't know why, but I just really vibe with how Atlus designed it. It's also hard not to talk about the character and monster designs in the Megaton series. You know which game I think excels in this regard, even though I haven't played it? Shin Megami Tensei 5, Vengeance. I've always wanted to try SMT5 at some point, but when I saw the marketing campaign for Vengeance, the enhanced re-release of SMT5, I really need to play this game at some point, like yesterday. The character designs of these new monsters were like really messed up and weird, but in a good way. It's hard to explain, but they're just great designs. And Metaphor really looks like it's going to keep Atlus's trend of incredible art direction going, because Metaphor's trailers have been looking incredible ever since it got announced. I mean, just look at this moon. That's a super cool moon, if you ask me. And do you know what else Atlus succeeds at doing? In fact, probably is the best in the entire industry? User interface. The UI in Atlus games is masterful. There is no other developer that touches close to how good Atlus's UI is, and no one says it better than the main director behind the Persona series and Metaphor, Katsura Hashino, who said in an interview last year that because you spend a lot of time in the menus of the games, the interface is a part of the game rather than something separate, and also saying it's a mistake to leave the UI design to new employees, which is apparently an industry standard in Japan. But just look at the HUD and many menus in the Persona games. They're incredible, and that world is probably underselling how good and crisp this looks, especially Persona 3 Reload's menus. It's like you're in an ocean and then constantly flowing to one another. It's a sight to behold, and it links back to the game's usage and theme of water. There's also another game with great UI that I've made, but I'll save that one for a bit later in the video. Moving on, let's take a look back and take a look at the trend that applies to all games published under Atlus's parent company, Sega. Think of one thing that stands out amongst some of Sega's current and past franchises that they all seem to share, cause although I do think it's unintentional, the pattern is there. Wait, do you hear it? That's right, music. Atlus has a stacked library of video game soundtracks because their sound team rarely, and I mean rarely, misses. From the chill vibes that we can hear in Persona soundtracks to the intense and hectic sounds of their digital Devil Saga, their soundtracks are so varied and each fit into a different genre of music, although they do share some common elements with one another. One of these elements is that they just sound so good, and the binding factor that links this all together, well, it's the most famous composer in Atlus's arsenal, Shoji Meguro. This guy is a musical genius who is a known guitarist and blends his rock knowledge with like anything he can find under the sun and just makes some pure fire out of it. From 1996 up until 2019, this guy has been behind most of Atlus's game releases, and they're all so good. Although he did leave Atlus back in 2021, you can still hear his works in Persona 3 Reload, where he helped with the rearrangements of the original soundtrack, and you'll be able to hear his newest work in Metaphor Refantazio, and man, some of those Metaphor songs that I've heard so far are just incredibly peak. There's another core element that I think stands out when you think of what makes Atlus's game so uniquely theirs, and I think it's time that I gave a mini review of a game that I kinda think encapsulates it. Although not the best story Atlus has told, it does hit a lot of the notes that from the games that I've played and heard of from their other games. Catherine. Catherine and its re-release, Catherine Full Body, is one of, if not the absolute wildest narrative that I've experienced. It's a game where you play as this dude called Vincent, who is worried about marrying his long-term girlfriend, Catherine, but the stress of finally settling down, he finds himself in a situation where he is cheating on her with a girl called Catherine. However, at the same time, he's also helping a young girl called Rin. After a long day, Vincent finds himself at a bar called a Stray Sheep, where he confides with his friends about his and their struggles in life and with women, and every night, Vincent finds himself in a nightmare where he is forced to climb a tower where sheep are also climbing up there with him, but these sheep are others who are suffering from the same nightmares, and if you die in this nightmare, you die in the real world. So with this brief synopsis, what's the biggest takeaway you can take from this plot? For me, it's that the stories are centered around some really dark tones, but are lightened with normal yet bizarre and light-hearted daily interactions. You got a serious plot that centers around the idea of infidelity and cheating, yet you got a support system around you that tries to help you cope with what you're doing, at times trying to help you, or just straight up calling you out for your actions. And one thing that Atlus games also do very well is just making the mundane day-to-day stuff actually matter. Because of how Atlus has a sort of life sim aspect in between combat, it gives you a lot of time to connect with the world, which I think works a lot better than most JRPGs out there. Even if Catherine doesn't count in this genre, it still takes a lot from the life sim moments to add a depth to the game. You drink with the homies at the bar, walk up and talk to random people at the bar and listen to their qualms and stories, and even in the small safe areas and the nightmare puzzles, you got a lot of time and choices to interact with the other sheep suffering in the nightmares. And all this, these smaller moments, are tightly woven in between the dark and chaotic nature of this game's puzzles and story, and if you do choose to take the time to interact with the characters, towards the end, you'll realize that those bonds and moments and connections that you made really do matter. This might be a bit wrong or generic, but I think Catherine is a game that managed to showcase what makes Atlus's games so special. The gorgeous art direction from its animated cutscenes and world design to the UI design that is just on a whole other level. I mean, really, every time I see their UI, I'm just in awe. And their music too, man, it's just got everything from heavenly to dark and gritty to somber to anything in between. And finally, the way they managed to create this nice balance between darker story beats and the happier ones is something only they've managed to crack the code in their gameplay loops. Before I end this video, I do want to thank you guys for watching all the way through and hope that you enjoyed the video, but I do also want to apologize to the SMT fans. I know that I'm missing many SMT games to play and the first two Persona games, and I promise you guys that I'll play them later on at some point. But before that, I'm going to be playing Metaphor Refantazio when it drops next week, and if you're new to Atlus games in general, I hope that this video has convinced you to give this game a chance, because chances are that this game will go hard. So, thanks for watching, have a good rest of your day, night, and week, and with that, Storm out.